Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. The first in-house production in Home Manchester's autumn and winter season for 2018 is a new production of French writer Jean Genet's 1947 play The Maids, in an English version by Martin Crimp. The play will be directed in the round at home by Lily Sykes, an English-born director who has lived and worked in Germany for the last 10 years and has recently become a German citizen. In a break during rehearsals, I spoke to Lily and asked her to explain the plot of The Maids.
The Maids is about two maids who work for a mistress, a single mistress. She lives in a big house in a wealthy district, and so every evening when the mistress goes out, the maids perform a ritual in which one of them dresses up as the mistress and the other one dresses up as the maid. And at the end of this ritual, the maid kills the mistress. Yeah. But the problem is they never get to this point because one of them is always scared that the other one is actually going to kill them. Yeah. And they keep on getting distracted by other things. So they have this sort of method of escapism, a very theatrical method of escapism, but they're not very good at doing it. Yeah. And on this particular evening, the night in which the play takes place, the maids have actually done something in real life to affect their mistress's environment and are actually plotting to kill her. And that, whether that succeeds or not is something that I'd rather leave to the viewers to find out.
Not too many spoilers.
No, not too many spoilers, exactly.
But this is from the 1940s.
Yes.
A time when the word meta-theatre wasn't quite as prominent as it, well, meta everything now.
Yes.
But there was a lot of it around, like something like 6 characters in search of an author. And
yes.
This is about, it's a performance about performing, isn't it?
Yes, it's a performance about self, and it's a performance, I think, about the different selves that we have, like the self that you have in everyday life, the role that you perform in everyday life, and the role that you perform in your dreams, and the sort of interplay between those two things. And I think that's something that, the sort of whole culture of existentialism is something that seems to me also quite a sort of French concern.
Yes.
Genet was a friend of Sartre's, or sort of a friend for a bit, and then they sort of fell out. But I think a lot of those concerns, existentialist concerns of who am I, are dealt with in this play. And that's the sort of thing that most interested me in looking at it. The role that you have in your fantasy, or the role that fantasy plays in life. I think escapism is something that's sort of familiar to people in everyday life, in terms of sort of reading a book or going to the movies. In more extreme forms, it's sort of doing therapy, or one of the things we've been looking at is Gestalt therapy, which is really about putting parts of yourself into sort of objects in the room, or into other people in the room, exploring parts of yourself through other people. Or if you go back to sort of more primitive times, and more primitive societies, then you have the ritual sacrifice or the religious ritual, things that were sort of in place, I think, in these societies to sort of cater for urges in human beings which maybe aren't catered for by the social self, by laws. To exist together, human beings have to have laws, otherwise the society doesn't work. But human beings are not very good at obeying laws. It seems to be proved sort of time and time and again. So what do you do with that bit that's not good at obeying laws? How do you find an outlet for it?
Yeah. And you mentioned existentialism, which was and his link with Sartre. Existentialism was a centre of theatre of the absurd at the time as well. Particularly Beckett. It's the central focus of all of Beckett's plays.
Yes.
And Beckett does focus on this ritual.
Yes.
But there's a pointlessness to it all as well,
yes.
isn't there?
There's something lovely about pointlessness. We live in such a pointful world.
Yes.
I think there is something wonderful about the pointlessness of art. And creating a space for something just being beautiful, just being playful.
So pointlessness doesn't have to lead to despair.
No, I don't think so. I think if Beckett was this, whatever fail better.
Yes.
If you accept it, then it can be humorous, Or there's a guy, William Erhard, sort of in the 70s, he sort of started this thing called EST training, and it was all about unlocking bits of this, unlocking your social self, kind of, and then unlocking the next bit of yourself, sort of like peeling layers off the human being like an onion. So at the end you get to this point which is nothing, which might seem quite cynical, but his argument was, out of nothing you can create.
Yeah.
So if you're with nothing, you're not pointlessness. You're not weighed down by a need to be moral or a need to be good in other people's eyes. You become free.
You can just be.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the theory.
Yeah.
Sort of, I would say it's probably more an interplay with. It's an interplay between freedom and despair, because obviously with freedom comes chaos.
Yes. And
then we get back to the beginning of why we invented society, which was to make laws so that we could keep out the chaos. So it sort of goes in a cycle. But I think there is something that's quite dangerous about that freedom. That makes it exciting, but it also makes it scary. So that's, I think, why a lot of people like to sort of keep away from it.
Yeah. Your production, you're casting the Maids with male actors.
Yes.
Not the first time it's been done. There is a history of that being done throughout the play. But why did you decide to do that?
I think it was because, for me, it was really about the exploration of the self. People playing other people in order to explore bits of themselves that are not maybe catered for by other bits of society. And if you have men playing the women, that's so visible on stage. I think also it's a way of having all the characters on stage at the same time. There are male characters who are mentioned in the play but don't kind of appear. I'm also always interested in the writer, the head behind the plays. That's something that a lot of post-dramatic writing plays with, the idea that all the characters are things that came out of somebody's head.
Yeah.
And so I think I was interested in just having actually all these characters potentially on stage at the same time. Just allows you to see things on different levels at the same time. And I think that's one of the things theatre can really do, is allow you to experience different realities at the same time. That is the proposition, isn't it?
Yes.
I know we're here, we're watching a play, we're in a theatre, but I believe that we're in a boudoir, or I believe that we're in a drawing room, I believe that we're in a prison. And those are things that really fascinate me in that sort of proposition. It's sort of magic.
Yeah. He was quite a character though, wasn't he?
Yes. I wouldn't like to have had him for my house for dinner. Or maybe I would have done. I would have had to choose my other guests,
yes.
I think he liked to offend people.
Yeah.
Yes, I think there's this sort of hatred, I think, of, or not hate, or disavowal of sort of conventional morality, disavowal of binaries. And I think that has a lot to do with his background.
Yeah.
He was a foundling, he was adopted. This is something that actually Sartre describes very well in Saint Genet, which is the book he wrote about him, which Genet apparently hated, which is a classic kind of Genet thing. But being a foundling, he was already excluded from sort of day one, being surrounded by people who had more than him, and this in a way motivates you to steal, I think, or there's this sort of theory that stealing is about imitating, stealing, because if the people you want to be have stuff, then you want to have stuff, and so and then went to prison and spent basically until he was 34, from between the ages of 16 and 34, sort of all that time, sort of in and out of prison. Went into the army and did lots of things as well. Was a vagabond, but that was a sort of cycle, which apparently is pretty normal. Like stealing becomes a kind of a cycle of, I think, being in and out, being in prison, getting out of prison. Yeah. So I think somebody who's always rejected by conventional morality, and so developed a resistance to it. Yeah. And actually, there's a story about he was incarcerated in Paris in 1943, one of the times, and this was sort of. And was at risk of going to a concentration camp. I mean, he was about to be deported to a concentration camp when he got out, when he was finally given a pardon, and he was in Paris with a whole load of left-wing ideological prisoners, and he thought at that time, well, I found the people who are going to support me, and they wouldn't look at him, with their bottoms because he was a common thief. So he sort of became quite cynical about left-wing politics as well at the same time, and the sort of avowed sort of morality of it. And there's also a great story about him going to Berlin. He stole, and then he went to Berlin, so at the time of Nazi rule. And when he was in Berlin, he said, I don't want to steal here because everyone's a thief. So so he's a very kind of suggestible man.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes him a really interesting author to do today, because it's about throwing received ideas into relief. It's about questioning them.
Yeah.
And I think that the sort of art space is a space where you can do that. I have no idea whether he believed everything he said. A lot of his stuff is very provocative. I don't know whether that really matters. No. I think the point is that it's there and it's in your face. It's unsettling, and I think in this very ostentatiously moral times, yes. You need something to unsettle the balance. Yeah. Yes, it doesn't have to be violent.
No.
Challenging, just unsettling. I think just everything is so contingent, the things that we believe, and we sort of think now that there's this idea of truth, and the truths that we hold are contingent, and I think it's just good to be aware of that. There's another side.
Yeah, and like you were just saying, then now left-wing liberals have been accused of being very moral in a narrow sense and rejecting people who might require help because they don't use the right words or they don't have the right background or something.
Exactly. I think there is the sort of whole sort of Trump fiasco sort of showed up how kind of bankrupt like left-wing ideology is. Yeah. It's one ideology against the other ideology, and it's always to do with defending your own interests. Yeah. But I think there's a problem when one side gets to be talking about the moral righteousness of what they're doing, yes, yeah. As opposed to what it really is, which is just defending things that you think about. And I think I think that's one of the things, sort of one of the impulses behind the sort of exclusion and alienation which is taking place not only in this country but in Europe or in America. It's this idea that there's an idea of sort of good and bad, yeah. And that the other people are bad people. Yes. The Brexit voters are responsible for the state of Britain at the moment. Yeah. Well, that's not true.
Yeah, no. And I was listening to something actually on a podcast yesterday about somebody was analysing how students' bodies are rejecting ideas that might offend their ideas. Yes. So there's no debate anymore, and it's part of what social media has been criticised for, creating these isolated communities of people who only hear their own opinions back at themselves.
Exactly. You stay in little bubbles, and this is, if you come back to the Maids, this is something about the Maids is all about people being caught in some sort of social class or role. Well, social media kind of extends that by not. There's no way of you hearing any kind of other. You're just fed with yourself sort of all the time.
So sometimes we need something like Genet to give us some uncomfortable truths.
Yes, exactly. And as I said, I think that is a place, that's something that really the art world can provide. Yeah. It can be uncomfortable, be weird, just confusing in an enjoyable way, because it's a place of play. It's a fantasy world, and it's a way in which you can maybe think other things. Right? It doesn't mean that you have to. Those have to be. They don't have to be your politics. Yeah. There's I think it's William Burroughs who said, "I believe so little of what I say." Yes. And I think there's that. It's a nice sort of description between the art world is a place where you can play with those ideas. Yeah. Whereas maybe and there's a lot of things going on in politics at the moment in which identity politics means that a lot of issues do become quite sensitive and are becoming quite difficult to talk about. And maybe the art world is a place where we need to extend that debate, rather than limiting it.
He's a figure that's he's another one like Artaud, another French, probably less successful.
He was very influenced by Artaud, I think.
You can see that coming through. But I like him. He was very influential on people. Probably a lot of people that don't know who he is, but some who do. Like most famously, David Bowie wrote the Jean Genet.
Yes.
Twisted his name slightly.
And Patti Smith was a big fan.
And these are people who, exactly in the same way, they play with roles, with gender roles, with sexuality, and with performing in public. So he's become influential, hasn't he, in that respect?
Very influential. Yes, I think influential in terms of his writing was quite sort of taboo at the beginning. I mean, it's very bold for its time. His novels are absolutely filthy. And I think a lot of the writing also it requires work. It's not easily consumable because it plays with form, and it plays with language, and the ideas that are being talked about are ideas that we're not sort of used to anymore. Things like role play. I think a lot of people find role play challenging, playing that, because it's sort of going into chaos.
Yeah.
You know, or people find things that subvert conventional ideas about thieves and about criminals and murderers also challenging, because they break up their worldview. Yeah, I think he's been very, very influential for that sort of more queer world, which is more interested in doing that. Like someone like, another person we were looking at was John Waters.
Yes.
You know, it's that who's also sort of incredibly filthy and sort of interested in just doing stuff kind of for the hell of it, and being, you know, John was always talking about good bad taste and bad taste, and good bad taste is again like something that's sort of quite sort of very freeing. So I think that world of that sort of non-binary world has been very influenced by his writing.
You're resident in Germany now. You're a German citizen, so not affected by recent politics in Britain.
Well, everybody's affected by it.
Well,
like, you know, it's I don't. Of course, it's different in Europe, but I think the departure of Britain from the EU is not going to be good for anybody.
Well, no. So you're within a different theatre tradition now that you're working in. So how is that different? How are you having to work in Britain?
Well, I think there are a lot of parallels. Most things are the same. You sort of work out what interests you in a text, and then you sort of try and find out a sort of playful way to put it on stage. I think what's different, sort of the main difference I would say is that the approach in Germany is a lot more conceptual. So I think it's always trying to find a sort of special world for a play.
So the onus is more on the director than the playwright for that? Yes,
I think the onus is sort of on trying to bring out themes in the play, more existential themes maybe, rather than focusing on the detail or the particularity. It's about looking at what are the sort of big existential themes which appeal to broadly to people. Of course, it's love or time or death or mistaken identity or the exploration of the self, and they try to find a way to bring those out. It's often very design-led, so German productions always look very impressive because the design is a sort of big, it's kind of the main feature of it. There's actually 3 months before you start rehearsing in Germany, there is something called a Bauprobe, which is basically like a set design rehearsal, where they mock up the set for you in the theatre, and so you can look at sightline, all the things that you need to know about the stage.
3 months before.
3 months before. So, you know, the design is really the first thing that's finished. So I think that's quite a lot of the time why German plays are often very conceptual in the design, because the design also needs to be quite flexible. In order to cater for things that planning or acting that might happen sort of after that. I think the idea is to go for an experiential approach to representing reality, as opposed to a surface representational approach. So it's more looking at how do we experience time. I don't believe that we experience time in a linear way. I think it's possible for us to experience three things three times at the same time. So depending where you are, if you're at a party, you know, a birthday party, then you might have an idea of the future, but you might meet people and you've also got the past happening in your head as well. Just one thing. I also think in terms of the self, I don't experience myself as one person, but that's the one person who's seen by society. We regard people as one. So German theatre, I think, is, in terms of the sort of overall approach, and it's very heterogeneous. So, you know, there are lots of differentiations within this, but I think it's looking at what does reality feel like for us, as opposed to what does reality look like. In the context of a play like The Maids, it's all about how reality feels like anyway, so that's all in the writing. The Maids is like a massive sort of ritualistic dream, and so I'm just trying to work out how we bring that on stage.
The funding situation is very different though in Germany, isn't it? Which probably accounts for being able to see the set 3 months before.
Yes, exactly.
When
here,
most
lucky.
plays wouldn't even be cast.
Yes, we are very, very lucky. We are very lucky. Oh, I say we. I'm German now. It's very new. It's a new thing for me. We're very lucky in that, you know, every city has, you know, at least one theatre that is up to, this is the Volksbühne in Berlin, it's up to 90% state funded. So if you think about paying £30 for a ticket, well, the government puts £300 on top of that for every person who's going to the theatre. Wow. So the budgets are enormous.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of the possibilities that a rehearsal room provides as well. You can rehearse in a set and you rehearse with costumes and stuff. So yes, I think there is more money for innovation. And there is an interest in innovation, a really big interest in innovation. I think the innovation thing is very cultural as well. Yeah. Obviously, like in our country, in other country, Great Britain, you know, Shakespeare's the father of theatre. I would say he's a writer, even though, you know, his worlds are sort of fantastic because they have lots of kind of big themes. But he's a writer, so we have a writer's theatre. Yes. Whereas in Germany, you know, the big sort of father is Brecht, who is a practitioner. Yes. So it's much more a practitioner's theatre. But I think the questioning of reality culturally really has a lot to do with historical developments in Germany over the past over 70 years. So if you look at the National Socialists and their art, which was very manipulatively emotional and, you know, sort of Wagnerian in style. Riefenstahl, yes, exactly. And then, you know, if you look at sort of what happened after the end of the war, and then if you look at the German Democratic Republic and the sort of restrictions that were placed on people there and what happened in Walkham, there's so much upheaval, there's so much mistrust of kind of conventional representations of reality, and mistrust, I think, of conventional forms of narrative. So Theodor Adorno said famously that after Auschwitz there's no possibility of writing poetry. Well, of course, he didn't mean that you can't write poetry, but he meant, you know, in the old way. You can't continue doing art in the old way. So I think since then there has been a questioning among artists across the board, but also, you know, among audiences of stories and how to tell stories. And I don't think that, you know, German stories rarely end well. So if you're looking at a sort of Shakespeare production and you say, well, there are 5 acts in a Shakespeare play and you've got sort of exposition, and then the 4th act you have a climax, and then the 5th act, so all the ends get nicely kind of wound up, you've got a conclusion. Well, German plays probably always end in the 4th act as the most chaotic point. Whereas in England, I think we tend to tell the Shakespeare plays, we tend to like a nice ending, or to know kind of what happens at the end. We like things to be wrapped up. We like even if it's not wrapped up. Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, and because stories have always gone well for us. Stories have always gone well for us. Like, you know, until now, maybe this is a brilliant chance. Like, I think, we've always been, you know, even losing the empire. People didn't really notice that until recently. No, it was so far away. Yeah. So I think that these differences are really cultural. And of course, the other thing is that German culture just isn't as diverse. Diversity here is much more. Just sort of happens much more, and that has to do with integration, which, you know, has taken place in my lifetime. Like, I remember when I was a kid, the theatre scene was very different, but in Germany, it's still happening and starting. So,
I was thinking when I started thinking about this play, I can't think of many French playwrights that get performed very much in England at all. I mean, there's German, Norwegian, Russian, but not so much French. You don't see much French drama.
What about Camus or Sartre?
I don't think I've ever seen one of their plays. No,
that's funny. They're done in Germany all the time. I think they're theme plays. I think they're theme plays, like Sartre's plays or Camus' plays. They're not really character plays. Right. They're mostly like, there's a theme and then there's somebody saying it. I think the English theatre is a character-driven theatre, and I like that. You know, I think people being mouthpieces for ideas is boring. You know.
Unless you like the ideas, unless you agree with those.
Unless you agree with the ideas, but then I could just read a book. Do you know what I mean? I sort of want to see the subtleties of communication, how difficult it is, even if you've got ideas and ideology or things you're trying to do. I mean, a bit like, you know, the Maids. They have a thing, they want to get there, but they're just not very good at it. And that's their human side, and that's kind of beautiful to watch. I think this discrepancy between high-minded ideas and then the sort of humanity of just failing. I mean, they're a bit like a sort of female Vladimir and Estragon. And it's interesting, I did a show, when I first started out, I did a show which I wrote with a friend, which was about these 2 women, and one wanted to go outside and the other wanted to stay inside, and it was kind of, it was just sort of quite existentialist sort of piece, whatever. It was a long time ago. But when our research, it was about, you know, the idea that if you go to Italy, or if you go to sort of southern countries where people sit on the streets, you see a lot of people sitting on the streets. It's often the men who are sitting on the streets on a bench, waiting, whereas the women will be waiting in the house. Yeah. So sort of the maids are in their house and they, you know, want to get out, but do they really want to get out? Because what happens when you leave the sort of confines of your environment? Yeah. Like what happens when you leave your sort of social bubble? Yeah. Just thinking, what about Dangerous Liaisons? I mean, people don't think about that as being a French writer, do they?
Well, possibly not.
Because it's Christopher Hampton.
Yeah. But again, I think more people know the film. But it's not very often done on stage.
Although Le Clos is also, I mean, that's also a play which is really subversive, because it's about people who love being naughty. Yes. You know, and that's kind of great. Really revel in it, and revel in role play or sort of making theatre. So it's funny, this thing sort of goes on, or, you know, before that, sort of all around the time, you have sort of Marquis de Sade. Like there's a lot of sort of people reveling in playing out sort of bits of their fantasy. There's also a movement which sort of started at the end of the 19th century called the Decadent movement, which Baudelaire was a sort of big sort of leading figure, and a guy called Haussmann, which was all about challenging kind of the end of the Belle Epoque, which was also a sort of just sort of pre-Genet time, which is also an era of sort of great prosperity and progress, and there's lots of fado going on in the theatres, and you know, scientific progress. And the decadents came out of that, and they were very critical of this sort of optimism and this kind of, I suppose, the abandoning of kind of the darker sides of things. And now you've got Michael Welbeck, who is also a real old bastard, but kind of great. Like you need him because he's pushing you. He's unsettling you with his work. You know,
you've actually got the theatre to rebuild their auditorium for this play as well.
Yes.
We're actually performing in the round.
Yes, it's very exciting. Yes, I think you talked about Arto earlier, and we talked a bit about ritual. So I think for me it's a huge ritual, the play, and I sort of wanted to create a ritualistic space in which the audience are sort of directly involved, as opposed to being cut off.
Looking at the picture frame in the corner.
Like it's just separated. So you always, you know, it's so much about yourself, and you're always looking at yourself. So, you know, it's sort of the structure of the theatre. It's not a theatre built in the round, so there's some bits which can't, you know, there are sort of two bits at the side which there are no audiences, but actually, as an audience member, you're always faced with the characters and then with another audience member. So it's like you're constantly looking in a mirror. So you're constantly being sort of watched. And I think that's a really exciting atmosphere to experience this play. And I think it's also it's just a massive dream, the play. And it's sort of about pulling the audience kind of into this dream. The setup, I think, when Genet wrote it, he wrote it for people who had maids, who would have recognised themselves in the mistress. While people nowadays have cleaning ladies, but they don't have live-in maids. No. So sort of it's about kind of trying to invite people into these characters and sort of into this world, which otherwise they might say, oh, that's got nothing to do with me. And I think it's got so much to do with us. Whether you go for the element of the self, or you just say, well, look, it's about people who are trapped in their sort of social roles and they can't really escape them except by sort of acts of extreme violence. And you know, we're just living in such a violent time at the moment. If you look at something like Brexit, you look at something like Trump, or if you look at what's just happened in Brazil, these are, for me, acts of extreme violence, and they're like the only way that something can change.
Well, you're creating a theatre in the round just down the road from possibly the most famous theatre in the round in the country, so you're going to have audiences here who will be used to watching theatre in the round, at least, won't they?
I hope they'll like it as much as the other theatre. They won't hate us. Yeah, I love theatre in the round. I think it's a really exciting communal experience, and I think, you know, what is theatre if it's not people sitting watching other people doing something? I think that or this thing of us doing things together. You're watching and I'm performing, but it's something that we're taking part in together. And I think that situation just kind of exemplifies or accentuates that relationship. You know, it's like the thing.
So apart from the theatre in the round, what else is there about your staging of it that you brought to it?
I say I don't want to give too much away, as usual. I'd say, it's a very ritualistic space. It is an imaginative world. It's a world that will invite the audience to enter the story imaginatively. I'm also working with a sort of a framing of the play, which will be an alternative way to start it, which will be looking more at the character of the writer and them entering an act of creation, a bit like the Maids when they're creating their choices, sort of finding parallels.
Another layer of meta-theatre.
Another layer of meta-theatre. Can't get enough of it, yeah. Yes, I think the relationship between the writer and the characters also, Genet is sort of famously meta in his writing. He's always talking about the fact that he has power over his characters, or sometimes his characters do things that he doesn't sort of want them to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's another sort of type of power relationship, which is sort of similar to the mistress's relationship with her maids. It's also translated by Martin Crimp, who is a great writer for making a theme out of writing and voices in people's heads.
And also somebody who writes quite unconventionally quite often as well.
Very unconventionally. Yes, exactly. I think sort of interested, especially in the sort of later works, the idea of characters as thoughts, or the idea of kind of stories and how do we kind of tell stories. And I think that interesting enough, sort of a subversion of kind of conventional categories, for bringing together of things like makeup and violence. So yeah, that feels like it.
One thing with working in the round, it limits you to some extent on things like design, doesn't it? So how much of a part does design play into it?
Yes, I think design is still a big part of it. I think design is about sort of architecture and creating a space in which you can play with the themes that happen in the play, which is power or the self. So in terms of design, I think our focus has been to create a space in which we can explore those relationships in the most sort of creative way possible. It's not, I hesitate to use this word because I don't really know what it means, as it's not a naturalistic space.
Right.
If that answers the question.
Yes. What about use of lighting and sound, music?
Yes, there'll be lots of that. I like that. Yes, I think, as you said, it's an imaginative world, it's a dream world. So I think elements like sound and music, which are very good at creating worlds and then taking them away, are elements we've been really interested in working with. I'm always interested in going for it, how does reality feel? A sort of central approach to bringing stories on stage, and music and light are very good at serving that.
So at the end of this, is it back to Germany to higher budgets and longer rehearsal periods?
Yes, but I love working with English actors. I really love working with English actors, and I think it's fantastic that you can cast here. In Germany, you cast from an ensemble, so you have a choice of sort of 20 actors who you can work with, which is fine, but you have to follow an interpretation based on who's available to you. It's fantastic for me to work in my mother tongue, and English actors are very nuanced in a way that German actors can be quite distant from emotions. They're very mistrustful of emotions. And English actors are not afraid to go to those places, and that's very exciting. But yes, I will be returning to Germany after this to do Much Ado About Nothing in Karlsruhe, and then another Martin Crimp play, actually. So it's a bit of a Martin Crimp year. I think creative work in a place in which you have people of different cultures is great, because there is always an atmosphere of curiosity in the room. Yeah. And one rarely shares the same cultural influences as the people one is working with. So there's always an element of communication there. Unfamiliarity with language is also a great basis for communication, because it often means that you have a deeper engagement with what you really mean. So a lot of my directing words are German words, because I've just been there for the past 10 years. Yeah. So actually engaging with what those really mean and creating a language out of sort of words which are fantasy words for the actors, but you sort of really know what they mean is really exciting. And I think you get to appreciate things in both cultures. Like, I think that the German budgets are fantastic and the opportunities that we have, I think that we don't appreciate them enough. I think that there is not enough innovation that's happening. State funding also means you have to get bums on seats. You are answerable to the town politics to get bums on seats. So there is a lot of programming which is quite safe, I think, in Germany. And that seems to me a big shame, because when I look at all the cuts that have been made here and the sacrifices that people are having to make, I just wish that some of the programming in Germany would be more adventurous.
The Maids by Jean Genet, directed by Lily Sykes, in a translation by Martin Crimp, will run at Home Manchester from the 16th of November to the 1st of December 2018. For more information, see homemcr.org. You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.